They handed me the keys at the lawyer's office like they were giving me trash. My uncle smirked. My cousin rolled her eyes. Even the lawyer looked apologetic. "The cabin on Blackwood Mountain," he said, sliding the deed across his desk. "It's all that's left of the estate." I stared at the yellowed document. My grandfather's signature faded but still visible at the bottom. 73 acres of forest, and a cabin he'd built with his own hands 60 years ago. I hadn't seen it since I was 12, since that last summer before Mom forbade me from visiting him. "Crazy old man and his worthless mountain," she'd said. Now he was gone, and that worthless mountain was mine. My uncle leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You should sell it, Claire. Place is probably condemned by now. I know a developer who'd give you $20,000 for the land. Cash. Easy money. $20,000. Split between property taxes, my maxed credit cards, and 3 months of missed rent. It would maybe buy me 6 months of breathing room. I was 46 years old, recently divorced, working 2 jobs, and drowning. 20,000 was a life raft, but I heard Grandpa's voice in my head, rough as gravel. "The land remembers, Claire Bear. When everyone forgets, the land remembers." I didn't know what he meant then. I picked up the deed and folded it carefully. "I'm keeping it." My uncle laughed. "Keeping it? Claire, you can't even afford your apartment. What are you going to do with a collapsed cabin in the middle of nowhere?" I looked him straight in the eye, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I'm going to find out why he left it to me." I walked out of that office with nothing but a deed, a memory, and the absolute certainty that Grandpa had left me something more than ruins. I just had to be brave enough to dig for it. The drive up Blackwood Mountain took 3 hours from the city, the last 45 minutes on dirt roads that barely qualified as drivable. My ancient Honda Civic groaned over rocks and ruts, branches scraping the sides. I hadn't been here in 34 years, but my body remembered the turns, the smell of pine and creek water, the way sunlight filtered green through the canopy. Then the trees opened up, and I saw it. My breath caught. The cabin stood, barely, in a clearing choked with overgrown weeds and saplings. The roof had partially collapsed on the left side, exposing blackened beams to the sky. Windows were broken or missing entirely. The porch sagged like a broken back. Vines covered the walls so thickly I could barely see the logs underneath. It looked like something from a horror movie, not the magical place I remembered. I sat in my car for a long time, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the ruins. What had I been thinking? I had no money, no construction skills, no plan. I'd taken a week off from both my jobs, time I couldn't afford, to come see this place. For what? To confirm it was garbage? I almost turned around right then. Almost. But then I saw it, carved into the doorframe, visible even through the vines. Our initials, CM plus AM, Claire Morgan and Arthur Morgan, grandfather and granddaughter, carved during that last summer when I was 12, and he taught me to use his knife. I remembered his hand over mine, guiding the blade. "When you carve something into wood," he'd said, "it stays. Long after we're gone, the land remembers." I got out of the car. The clearing was silent except for birdsong and wind through the pines. I walked to the porch, testing each board carefully. Most held. The door was swollen shut, but after 3 hard shoves, it gave with a groan that sounded almost human. Dust and decay and animal smell hit me. But underneath it, impossibly, I smelled pipe tobacco, Grandpa's smell. I stepped inside, and 34 years fell away. I was home, or what was left of it. The interior was worse than outside. The collapsed section of roof had let in years of rain, rotting the floorboards in the northwest corner. Animal droppings, raccoon, maybe squirrel, covered every surface. Broken glass crunched under my boots. But the main structure, those massive hand-hewn logs Grandpa had cut himself, was still solid. I walked through slowly, memories surfacing with each step. There was the fireplace he'd built from river stones, still intact. The kitchen area where he taught me to cook over a wood stove. The ladder to the sleeping loft, where I'd spent summer nights watching stars through the window. All of it buried under decades of neglect and ruin. I pulled work gloves from my bag and started clearing debris, not even sure why. Maybe to prove I could do something. Anything. I dragged out rotted furniture, swept broken glass, pulled down hanging vines through the broken windows. Hours passed. My hands blistered. My back screamed. But slowly, incrementally, the cabin emerged from the garbage. That's when I found the first strange thing. Under a pile of collapsed shelving in what had been Grandpa's workshop area, I found a crate, old wooden military surplus, still sealed with rusty nails. The wood was water-damaged, but intact. I pried it open with a broken board, and inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were journals, dozens of them, leather-bound, hand-stitched, filled with Grandpa's cramped handwriting. I opened one at random and read, June 15th, 1962. The land shows me things the others refuse to see. I've mapped 7 sites now. They think I'm crazy. They don't understand what's been here all along, what the mountain's been protecting. Claire will understand. When she's old enough, Claire will see. My hands started shaking. Sites? Protecting what? I flipped through the journal. Pages of sketches, coordinates, diagrams of the land, cryptic notes about markers and original boundaries, and proof they can't deny. What had Grandpa found on this mountain, and why did he think I would understand? I sat on the dusty floor reading until the light faded, and I had to use my phone flashlight. The journals spanned 40 years, from the 1960s until just months before Grandpa died, and they told a story I'd never heard, a story my family had apparently worked very hard to bury. In 1961, Grandpa bought these 73 acres for almost nothing. The land had been considered worthless, too remote, too steep, no road access at the time. But Grandpa wasn't buying it for farming or development. He was buying it for what he'd discovered, evidence that this mountain had been sacred ground for the indigenous people who'd lived here for thousands of years before white settlement. The journals documented everything: carved symbols on rock faces, stone arrangements marking celestial events, a spring that had been a ceremonial site, ancient trails, burial grounds, and most significantly, artifacts that proved continuous habitation going back potentially millennia, proof that contradicted the official history, claiming this area had been empty wilderness when settlers arrived. Grandpa had tried to protect these sites, to get them officially recognized and preserved. He'd contacted archaeologists, historians, the State Historical Society. Some came to look. Most dismissed him as an eccentric old man seeing what he wanted to see. And my family, his own children, had been mortified. My mother's voice echoed in my memory. Dad's embarrassing us with his Indian nonsense. I never knew what she meant. Now I did. They'd wanted him to sell the land, take the money, stop making waves. He'd refused, and he'd been cut off, isolated, labeled crazy by his own family. Except for those summers with me, those last precious summers before they stopped letting me visit. I wiped tears from my face, leaving dirt streaks. Grandpa hadn't left me a worthless cabin. He'd left me his life's work, his legacy, proof of history that powerful people had wanted to erase. And now I understood his last message. The land remembers, Claire Bear. When everyone forgets, the land remembers. He'd left it to me because he knew I would remember. I would believe. I would fight for the truth when no one else would. I spent that first night in my car, wrapped in my sleeping bag, too wired to sleep. At dawn, I made instant coffee on my camping stove and went back inside with new purpose. If I was going to honor Grandpa's legacy, I needed to do 2 things: restore this cabin so I had a base to work from, and verify his findings so no one could dismiss them like they'd dismissed him. The restoration seemed impossible. I had maybe $3,000 in savings, money I couldn't really afford to spend. No construction experience beyond watching YouTube videos. No help. I'd told no one I was coming here, but I'd grown up poor, resourced, stubborn. I knew how to make something from nothing. I started with the roof. I couldn't afford contractors, but I could afford supplies. I drove to the nearest town, 45 minutes down the mountain, and found a building supply store. The older man behind the counter listened to my stumbling explanation of what I needed. "You're Arthur Morgan's granddaughter," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, surprised. He smiled, sad and warm. "Your grandpa helped my dad when no one else would. Gave him work during the bad years. Never asked for payback." He wrote some numbers on a pad. "This is what the materials actually cost. I'm giving them to you at my cost. No markup. And I'm throwing in loan of tools. You bring them back when you're done." I almost cried right there in the lumber aisle. Why? Because Arthur was a good man who got treated badly by people who should have known better. Because sometimes you help people for no reason except it's right. He extended his hand. "Name's Frank. You need advice? You call me." I drove back up the mountain with a truck bed full of lumber, borrowed tools, and the first spark of hope I'd felt in years. Maybe I couldn't do this alone, but maybe I didn't have to. The work was brutal. I'd never done construction beyond hanging shelves, and now I was rebuilding a roof. I watched YouTube videos until my phone died, then worked by instinct and sheer stubbornness. I cut lumber wrong and had to recut it. I hammered my thumb twice. I fell off the ladder once, landing hard enough to knock the wind out of me. But slowly, board by board, the roof took shape. I worked from dawn to dusk, breaking only to eat protein bars and drink water from the spring Grandpa had piped into the cabin. At night, I read more journals by lantern light, learning about the sites he'd documented. By day 5, I had half the roof framed. My hands were raw, my muscles screaming, but I'd done it. Me, alone. I stood back, looking at my work, and felt something I hadn't felt since the divorce. Pride. I'd created something. I'd solved problems. I'd learned new skills. I was building. That evening, sitting on the repaired porch watching sunset paint the mountains gold, I called my mother for the first time in 2 months. "Claire, where are you? You missed your shift at..." "I'm at Grandpa's cabin." Silence. Then, "What? Why would you go there?" "I told you to sell it." "I'm not selling it, Mom. I'm restoring it." "That's ridiculous. You don't have money for..." "I'm doing it anyway." My voice was steady, calm. Grandpa left me this place for a reason. He documented history here that matters. Sacred sites, archaeological evidence, things that prove... Oh God, not this again. Her voice went cold. "He filled your head with his nonsense too. Claire, those sacred sites are rocks. There's nothing there, but there's everything here." I surprised myself with the intensity. There's truth here, history that matters, and I'm going to restore it all. The cabin and Grandpa's work. You're wasting your life on a dead man's delusions. I looked at the half-built roof, at the forest spreading for miles, at the mountains holding thousands of years of memory. No, Mom, I'm finally building something that matters. I hung up before she could respond. By day 10, I had the roof complete and was working on the floor in the collapse section. That's when I found the second discovery. I was pulling up rotted floorboards when I noticed something underneath, a pattern in the dirt. I cleared more boards and saw it clearly. Symbols carved into the foundation stones, identical to symbols Grandpa had sketched in his journals. He hadn't just found sacred sites on the land. He'd incorporated their symbols into the cabin itself. It was a message, a preservation, a way of honoring what had been here long before him. I sat back, overwhelmed. This whole cabin was part of his legacy. Every board and stone chosen with purpose. I couldn't just restore it. I had to restore it right, honoring his intention. I started being more careful, documenting everything before I changed it, photographing, sketching, treating the cabin like the archaeological site it partially was. And then Frank showed up. I heard his truck coming up the road and met him outside. He climbed out carrying a cooler. "Thought you might need a decent meal," he said, pulling out sandwiches and cold drinks. We sat on the porch, eating in comfortable silence. Finally, he said, "How much do you know about what your grandpa was doing up here?" I told him everything I'd learned from the journals. He nodded slowly. He tried to get the Historical Society to recognize the sites. They refused, said there wasn't enough proof, that the artifacts could have been moved here, that it didn't meet their criteria. He paused. "But between you and me, the real reason was politics. Acknowledging indigenous sacred sites on private land opens up questions about land rights, repatriation, legal claims. Easier to just say the evidence isn't there. That's why they called him crazy. That's why they isolated him, made sure his findings never got traction." Frank looked at me seriously. "If you pursue this, Claire, you're going to face the same resistance. People with power, money, political connections who don't want this history acknowledged. You ready for that fight?" I thought about my mother's dismissal, my family's mockery, the years of being told I wasn't enough, wasn't capable, wasn't worth listening to. "I've been fighting my whole life," I said. "At least this time it's for something that matters." 3 weeks in, I'd made enough progress that the cabin was livable. Roof solid, floor safe, windows covered with plastic until I could afford glass, basic wood stove working. I moved out of my car and into the loft, sleeping where I'd slept as a child. The first night, I woke to strange sounds, rustling, movement. I grabbed my flashlight, heart pounding, and crept to the loft railing. Below, in the flashlight beam, a young deer stood inside the cabin, having pushed through the plastic on a window. We stared at each other. Then she turned calmly and walked back out the way she came. I started laughing, slightly hysterical. I was living in a cabin so unfinished that deer could wander through. This was insane. This was impossible, but it was mine. The next morning, I started on Grandpa's real legacy. I took his journals and GPS coordinates and began visiting the sites he'd documented. The first was a rock face 3 miles into the forest, accessible only by overgrown trail. And there, exactly where he'd marked it, were the carvings. Spirals. Circles. Figures that could have been human or animal or something symbolic. Weathered by time but unmistakable. Not random. Intentional. Significant. I photographed everything. Took measurements. Compared them to Grandpa's sketches from 40 years ago. They matched perfectly. He hadn't imagined them. He hadn't exaggerated. He'd documented truth. Over the next week, I visited 7 sites, all exactly as described. The stone arrangements, the ceremonial spring, the trail markers. Every single thing he'd claimed was real, was there, was proof. I sat by the spring on my 7th day, overwhelmed. Grandpa had been right about everything, and he'd died dismissed, mocked, isolated by his own family for telling the truth. I pulled out my phone and made a decision. I called the state archaeological office. I have evidence of indigenous sacred sites, I said. Multiple sites, documented over 40 years, with photographs and GPS coordinates. I'm requesting an official survey. The woman on the other end sounded skeptical, but she took my information. Someone will contact you within 6 to 8 weeks. I also called Frank. I need a lawyer, someone who knows about historical preservation and indigenous rights. I know someone, he said. The archaeologist arrived 6 weeks later, not the dismissive brush-off I'd feared, but a serious professional from the state university. Dr. Sarah Chen spent 3 days examining Grandpa's documentation and visiting sites. I watched her face as she studied the rock carvings, the stone arrangements, the artifacts I'd carefully cataloged. On the 3rd evening, she sat on my rebuilt porch and said the words that changed everything. "This is extraordinary. Your grandfather documented what appears to be a ceremonial landscape spanning several square miles. Some of these sites could be 1,000 years old or more. This is exactly the kind of evidence we need to expand understanding of pre-contact indigenous presence in this region." My hands shook. So he was right? People will believe it now? I'll prepare a report recommending full archaeological survey and potential nomination to the National Register of Historic Places. But Claire, she looked at me seriously, this will bring attention. Media attention. Political attention. People who don't want this history recognized will push back. Are you prepared? My grandfather spent 40 years preparing me, I said. Dr. Chen smiled. Then let's make sure his work finally gets recognized. The report came out 6 weeks later. The local newspaper picked it up first, then regional media, then national. Sacred indigenous sites discovered on private land. Read the headlines. My phone exploded with calls. Reporters, historians, indigenous groups, activists, lawyers, and threats. Someone spray-painted fake history on my truck. I got anonymous calls telling me to stop stirring up trouble. A developer offered me $50,000 for the land. Quick sale, no questions. My family called, furious. "You're making us look like fools," my uncle sputtered. "Dad was crazy, and you're making it worse." Dad was right, I said calmly, and I have proof. But the most important call came from a woman named Mary Blackfeather, a tribal elder from the indigenous nation whose ancestors had lived on this land. "Your grandfather tried to contact us 40 years ago," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We didn't have resources to pursue it then. But now, because of you, we can reclaim part of our history, our sacred places. Thank you for protecting them." I cried for an hour after that call. 8 months after I'd first arrived at the cabin, I stood on the rebuilt porch watching sunrise paint the mountains gold. The cabin was fully restored now. Roof solid, windows replaced, floor repaired, wood stove heating the space, solar panels powering lights. I'd done most of the work myself, with Frank's advice and occasional help from volunteers who'd heard my story and wanted to contribute. But the real transformation wasn't the building. It was me. I'd arrived broken, divorced, broke, working dead-end jobs, convinced I was worthless. My family had spent my life telling me I wasn't smart enough, strong enough, important enough. The divorce had confirmed it. I'd believed it. But this cabin, this land, this legacy had shown me something different. I'd learned construction, archaeology, legal advocacy. I'd spoken at town halls and university lectures. I'd stood up to developers and politicians and my own family. I'd protected sacred ground and honored a good man's life work. I'd built something that mattered. The land was now under permanent conservation easement, protected forever. 7 sites had been officially designated as historically significant. A partnership with the tribal nation meant they could access their sacred places for ceremonies, and Grandpa's cabin had become an educational center, hosting school groups and researchers studying the sites. I'd turned ruins into legacy, exactly as Grandpa had believed I could. My phone buzzed. Dr. Chen, texting about the documentary crew arriving next week to film the sites. I smiled. A year ago, I'd been handed keys to what everyone called worthless ruins. They'd told me to sell it and move on. Thank God I hadn't listened. Because some things can't be measured in money. Some legacies are built on truth, persistence, and the courage to honor what others want to forget. I looked at the carved initials on the doorframe, CM plus AM, still visible after all these years. I did it, Grandpa, I whispered. The land remembered. And now, so does everyone else. The sunrise light hit the cabin, making it glow. And I knew, absolutely, that I was exactly where I was meant to be. 1 year to the day after receiving the deed, I held an official dedication ceremony at the cabin. The clearing was full of people, tribal elders performing blessing ceremonies, archaeologists presenting findings, local community members, reporters, Frank and his family, Dr. Chen, and even a few distant relatives who'd quietly reached out to apologize. My mother hadn't come. My uncle had sent a hostile email, but I'd stopped needing their approval. I stood before the crowd, holding Grandpa's original journal. My grandfather, Arthur Morgan, bought this land 60 years ago. I began, my voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. Not to develop it or profit from it, but to protect it. He spent his life documenting sacred sites, preserving history, and trying to ensure that truth wasn't erased. He was dismissed, mocked, isolated, called crazy by people who should have listened. I looked at the cabin, at the forest, at the mountains. He left this to me because he believed I would continue his work. I almost didn't. I almost sold it without ever coming here. But I'm so grateful I found the courage to see what he saw, to value what he valued, to fight for what mattered to him. I opened the journal to his last entry, written 2 weeks before he died. The land remembers everything, even when we forget. Someday someone will listen. I pray it's Claire. She has the heart for this. She has the strength. She just doesn't know it yet. My voice broke, but I kept reading. Tell her I'm proud of her. Tell her the cabin is hers because I know she'll protect it. Tell her she's stronger than she believes. Tell her the land remembers. I closed the journal, tears streaming. Grandpa, I heard you. I listened. I protected it. And I finally learned what you always knew. I'm stronger than I believed. The crowd erupted in applause. Mary Blackfeather approached and wrapped me in a hug. Your grandfather honored our ancestors when no one else would, she said. And you've given us back our sacred places. You're part of our story now, Claire. Family. I looked around at the people gathered, the community I'd built, the purpose I'd found, the legacy I was stewarding. They'd handed me ruins and expected me to give up. Instead, I'd turned those ruins into something extraordinary, not despite the doubts, because of them. Because sometimes the greatest gifts are the ones everyone else thinks are worthless. And sometimes the strongest people are the ones who had to build their strength from nothing. I'd arrived at this cabin with $3,000, no plan, and a lifetime of being told I wasn't enough. I was leaving with a legacy, a purpose, and the absolute certainty that I was more than enough. The land remembered. And now, finally, so did I.